Welcome back to a live reading of The Effigy of Love, as written by Tony Sjöblom and read by Juho Hankala. This is Chapter 21, Eternal Dreams, Perpetual Nightmares. Standing with his back pressed against the rough castle wall, Endrik feared his heart would beat its way out of his chest. Not because of the aching pain in his still healing legs, though, nor from the sudden physical exertion. No, his heart raced from the anticipation of finally meeting her again. Though he had snuck away countless of times before, tonight it somehow felt like the first time all over again, except this time he knew for a fact that victory tasted as sweet as summertime honeycombs. Standing pressed against the wall, he felt the cold bite into his fingertips, and something grey rumble at the edge of his consciousness. Indeed, he had been in this exact position so many times before, and still was here for some reason. What if this is my fate? To be shackled to this castle, never to be free. Heavy and oppressive clouds of doubt started clouding Endrik's mind as he thought back on all those times he had indeed already gone through these exact emotions at this exact location. How sure he had been of his victory back then too. How everything had gone according to plan, yet ultimately failed in the end. What if hope was the reason he was still standing with his back pressed against the grey? What if it had clouded his mind as much as the doubt with all those promises of escaping the grey? What if fate... No. Endrik put his hand to his chest and closed his eyes, realizing the hope within him was getting overpowered by doubt. He would never let hope die, and fate was clutched in the palm of his hand. The doubt, those rumbling clouds. On the other hand, was another trace of grey he did not want nor need. Breathing in deep, he stoked the fire within him and watched the doubt flee his body with his misting breath. He knew relying on hope alone was dangerous. Following its light was like following a falling star. It would only lead you astray. But inside Endrik lived something that burned even brighter than hope. Resolve. Last time, he had made a fatal mistake at some point. This time, he would not. For he would run, farther than his legs would take him, and even then he would not stop. No, he would run and run until his legs gave up, until he would forget the color grey, until he would fall into her arms. Only then would he be safe and sure. Only then would he be at peace. I'm coming, my love. Endrik's thoughts screamed inside his head, as longing and desperation wanted to fly over the river. When I cross the ford, reach out and take me away. Let us soar through the skies and leave this all behind. Take me back to those green hills I now call home. Open your heart and let me in. Clutching hope tightly, he let his resolve take the reins as he started to cross the rushing ford. In the biting cold of the late winter night, the light from the torch on the ramparts made the rushing water and snow-covered forest glisten brightly, effectively illuminating the whole scene. Little did it matter, though, how well the torch did its work, for Tanner did not, as Endrik had expected. The man was as predictable as the minister's bell, standing with his face and body pressed close to the flickering light of the torch in the sconce, eyes pressed, firmly shut. His wide shadow was smeared across the ford like a bridge of darkness upon which Endrik could tread without fear of anyone noticing him. Alas, without the twin stars lighting his way, it was harder than ever to cross the river. His footing slipped on the icy rocks too many times than he cared to count, and many a groan was suppressed as blunt rocks met with aching legs. Had it not been for the shadow that obscured him, someone would have surely spotted him. His burning resolve hissed as the splashing water drenched him, but it would never die. Once on the other side, Endrik leaned his back against the familiar elm and watched heavy mist form in front of him. He did not want to stop, but the pain in his limbs was becoming unbearable, as if the healed bones were breaking all over again. Gloom and despair started creeping up on him, slowly covering his feet, then his throbbing legs. He clenched his jaw and sputtered curses into the night through gritted teeth. You can never stop me. Nothing can hold me back. Endrik burned away the grey, and warily eyed the forest. He had no idea what was going on outside of the castle walls since his last attempt at escaping. For all he knew, they could have ordered a squad to patrol the forest, ready to ambush anyone else foolish enough to attempt to flee. Little did it matter, though, as Endrik felt his determination roar inside of him. Even death, would it be preferable to returning to the castle. As the fire within him grew larger and hotter, he took careful and deliberate steps deeper into the forest. No matter how much he wanted to run and never stop, he was smart enough to listen to a tiny voice inside of him that told him to not take unnecessary risks. Not now, when there was so much to lose and everything to gain. To Endrik's luck, there was nothing but darkness around him. No flickering lights of torches skulking around, no silhouettes of anyone patrolling the woods, no sound of feet trampling the ground, nothing. It made Endrik's skin crawl and mind want to flee its own thoughts. Indeed, there was not even the faintest shimmer of his twin stars, not a note of the alluring song that was her on the wind, not a trace of that sweet scent he loved getting drunk on. He had entered a void that was as silent and lifeless as death, a void where his own thoughts were slowly burying him and snuffing out the hope that had only recently burned so bright. God, if you've not yet abandoned man, please, let her be there. Let me have my happy ending. Endrik closed his eyes and drew a deep breath, desperate to fill his lungs with her. Yet nothing but a cold, damp smell of rotting wood filled his body. Feeling hope leaving him, he ran after it. Alas, its faint light only diminished at the edge of the void, and as it shrank in front of him, he wanted to break into and cry. He wanted this all to be over. He wanted to forget everything that had ever happened to him, save for crossing paths with her that fateful evening merely 2 seasons ago. Fate, God, do not abandon me to this forsaken place. There was no reply, save for the whistling wind above him only adding to the hopelessness. Yet Endrik did not falter. He might be alone and abandoned. The hope that was barely twinkling in the dark might be but a pale comparison to the twin stars that had once guided him, but it would be enough. He was bringing his own light. His burning resolve would never let hope die. Thus, stumbling over ice-covered roots with icy branches snagging at the hem of his cloak, he started singing their song. First but a mumble, then almost shouting it, in a desperate attempt to conjure up a vision of her. It was a futile attempt. No one joined him as he sang, and finally the woods fell silent again. Singing without half of his symphony, his whole world accomplished nothing. He could not sing without her. He could not love without her. He felt like smoke without fire, wind without air, love without feeling. There was only cold darkness without an... No, he told himself, as dark thoughts soured his frail mind. The darkness outside mattered not. He had always enjoyed it, and would do so now, and the darkness could not fit inside of him. The inferno within him would eat it up the second it would enter. Indeed, he might lack the guiding light that was her, but the fire searing in his veins would light the way. He had traversed this path for years, and could easily find his piece of heaven on earth, even now, in ultimate darkness. But what then? What if he found it, but not her? No. Begone, dark thoughts. You demons are banished. I shall not falter, not when I'm this close. The fire within him was stoked, and burned through his limbs, eating away at the pain as he picked up pace. He was close, so close now. Half an hour later, of fleeing everything that was grey and demonic, he reached his most favourite place on earth, the place where the crowns of the trees were ever verdant, where the moonlight was free to dance upon the mirror-like surface of the pond, where his heart and soul belonged. The instant his feet touched familiar ground, the tears of joy started streaking his freezing cheeks, and he collapsed onto his knees in a cacophony of sobs and wails of both happiness and despair. He ran his hands over the snow-covered ground, but it felt wrong. Chest heaving and teeth clattering, Endrik dried his eyes and looked down at the ground. The soft green grass and moss that should have met his fingers had been trampled into a rough, frozen paste that reminded him of the castle floor. It was colder than ice, and it pricked and stained his fingers in a way cold never had before. The ever-silent, pale celestial being peeked through the mass of clouds above, curious to see if Endrik had finally found his fairy tale ending. What the silvery light revealed was far from happiness. It was a barren wasteland that made Endrik's heart nearly break in two. Indeed, in the weak light washing over the glade, everything looked wrong. The trees had lost their crowns, the ground had lost its verdancy, the wind had lost its warmth. But worst of all was the layer of grey that not only covered the scene, it was seeping into it. Endrik felt himself grow impossibly pale as he looked down at his hands and realized that they weren't stained with snow. They were stained with ash. The memories of that terrible night crashed over him like a tidal wave, the acrid chemical fumes eating away the calming smells of nature, the sounds of the hounds barking and men yelling, the hellish warmth of the conflagrated tree pressing against his freezing body. While a sore reminder of the day he had been stolen away from his love was a crushing grey wave of futility and sadness, the realization that it was the other way around, he had been robbed of his love, was a devastating wave of black scorn, hatred, and cruelty. It instantly dried his tears of joy and turned them into cold, iron-tasting droplets. Gritting his teeth, he furiously wiped away the ashen stains from his hands. He had not come here to relieve this pain. He had come here to get away from pain altogether. The moon, saddened by the reality of it all, slowly turned its back on what it had thought would be a happy ending to a grey fairy tale, leaving Endrik to rely solely on the diminishing light of his hope. "Are you there, my love?" Endrik cried as the darkness swallowed him. "Can you see me? Or hear me? It is I, Endrik. I finally returned, and this time for the last time. This time we will make it out of here. I know it, I promise. I'll run till my feet or my bones break, and not even then shall I stop." He stumbled around the pond, boots crunching the trampled icy ground as he frantically searched for those twin stars of his. "I'll do anything for you. I'll do anything for you to reach out and take what is yours, my heart, and hold it forever. Guide me and I'll run until my legs give up, only to get back up and run some more. I'll not stop until I hold you in my arms." Yet no one answered. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, everything looked grey and twisted around him. What once had been evergreen tranquility was no more. There was no golden hearts pounding in the silence, no mesmerizing song in the wind. Nothing but silence answered his calls, and nothing but grey desolation revealed itself. Instead of finding his eternal dream, he had run straight into a perpetual nightmare. Alas, when things were the bleakest and most hopeless, he recalled the one thing that had connected them in the first place: the painting. Like an arrow fired from a bow, he flew across the clearing and threw himself to the knees by the great oak, that once majestic tree, and now but a burnt-out husk of its former self. "Please, tell me you're safe," he repeated in his mind, as he desperately brushed the snow and ash away around the tree. "It should be here. This is where I left her." Futile as it may seem, there had in fact been no talk about the painting since his mother had taken it. Had Felth found it in the woods, he most surely would have taken it back to the castle and told Malwyn about it. Thus it had to be here, where he had seen her for the first time, where he had placed her upon returning, where he had slept with her, where he had been taken away from this all by her. His numb fingers ran over something that felt like fabric, seemingly fused to the oak. It was too dark to see correctly, but whatever scraps he touched were black as coal. Endrik felt the last nail being driven into the coffin of his hope. Its last dying words reminded him of the burlap sack. Alas, whether it was the canvas or the sack Felth had emptied mattered little at this point. Tears flowing from an endless ocean of sorrow had already started streaking down his cheeks as he caressed the fabric. Hope's light slowly drained through his fingers until he was left in complete darkness and silence. The seconds stretched into minutes and minutes into hours. Still kneeling, devoid of everything human, he didn't feel empty. No, at the bottom of his being, something foul and bitter still warmed his heart and body, kept him alive against the wintry odds. Endrik had no will nor energy to fight it. No matter how wrong the fire felt, looking to the cloud-covered sky, he let the fire seize control of him. As he silently cursed his sorry being, then muttered curses toward the night itself, then shouted curses at the world, finally howling curses at God, fate, that cruel mistress he had trusted with his whole being. Once his throat was sore from all the screaming, he hurled the last curses at the one that was responsible for all this pain to begin with. Himself. Everything and everyone was cursed, except her. His twin stars, shining somewhere far out of reach and out of sight. But they had to be somewhere, hadn't they? Though he had emptied himself of everything, he could still feel her within him, like a scent on the wind, couldn't he? Yet, he saw no one. Desperate and lamenting, he hammered the ground with his cold fists, praying and hoping that someone would answer his cries and accusations, even hoping God would smite him for his blasphemous curses, but silence was all that reached him.
"You can't abandon me, I beg of you,"
Hendrik shouted between his sobs, as his breath misted into dark clouds in front of it.
"We were supposed to leave together, to go back to those hills, that village, the most beautiful place in the world, our home."
Feeling sapped of energy, his whole body convulsing from the wintry cold, he stammered softly as he laid down.
"Here, I'm still here where you left me. Come, take my hand. Lead me home or astray, I do not care where, as long as you wash the grey away and cover me with green and gold. Tuck me inside of your heart and let me bathe in your love. I'll do anything you ask, and more. If only you'll take my hand and transport me far away from here, please."
Only silence replied in its monotonous, harsh voice, accompanied only by the whistling wind, one that did not contain her soft touch upon his cheek, only ice-cold claws that raked his frozen body. Finally, the words turned into silent sobs as he lay there, still as a statue. His hands were numb from wiping cold tears and running all over the ashen ground in a desperate search for her touch. His feet were like blocks of ice from the plunges into the river. His limbs quivering beneath his stiffening clothes, he tugged his ocean blue cloak tightly around him and closed his eyes. The last resort to find her. In a dream. His voice but a whisper between his clattering teeth, desperately fighting against the buffeting wintry gales, he spoke his last words of love into the night. "Do not worry, my love. If you cannot reach me, I'll make my way to you. I can already feel it. The song of our love, the symphony of our hearts, the colors of your soul. There. So distant yet so close. I can already feel you, my love. How warm your touch upon my skin. Here, take my hand. Grant me this dance once more and let us paint the world in the colors of our love. Forever.